So we're going to be working horizontally, as I said, and I've got an A3 piece of paper with a nice watercolour texture, watercolour paper, and I've put double strips of masking tape around the edge, so I've got a space in between here that I'm working in. Again, it's quite a handy tip if you ever want to get anything framed. You need to leave a little bit of space for the framer to do the mount, otherwise they moan at you. So what we're going to do is to use just some really abstract placing of colours along here, but we're going to hopefully get gravity to pull the colour down and give us some drips and trails. Then we're going to flip the board the other way up and add a few more so that when we look at it, what we have is things kind of growing down and things kind of growing up. So to start with, we're going to be using a colour palette of greens, a little bit of browns, and sort of some so the greens, blue, yellowy greens and turquoisey greens, and a few little bit of browns. So what I'm thinking of is that kind of hedgerow kind of exuberance that you get maybe towards the end of the summer, where a few things are starting to go over towards autumn. So things are maybe getting a little bit crispy and a little bit not exactly tired, but sort of worn, and they're in their really full sort of strength grow. But I am going to keep it very sort of abstract. I'm going to be using some black pen, some white pen, probably some green as well. So I'm going to start with, I want to get my paper with a very sort of gentle wet covering. If you've got a spray bottle, that's what I'm going to be using, or have your hairdryer handy, because we're going to have to hairdry at some point. So I've got a spray bottle, and I'm just going to give that a light spritzing of water. If you don't have a spray bottle, then dip a big brush into your water and just put a few stripes of wet across the page so that we've got a wet surface. I quite like using a spray bottle for this because you can sort of see, it gives you like an overall spray. It's not too directional. With a brush you tend to get a movement in one direction or another. So I've now got a nice wet surface. You can see already I've got drips of water on the surface, so I can use those. They're sort of starting off with my drawing. So I'm going to start with some greeny blues. So I want a bluey green or a greeny blue, depending how you like to think about it. Nice square brush. I tend to use a square brush quite a lot, I know, but I do like them. So greeny blue, bluey green, and I'm going to put a sort of splodge, it's just a very artistic and technical term for it, onto my paper. Sort of in the middle, I'm going to do to the sort of left-hand side, somewhere around here. So just starting to build up some green, bluey green on there. And you can see you get a nice weight because the paint collects at one side. So I'm already getting like a sort of a weight or gravity towards the bottom. And then maybe just moving along through a couple more of these, just using the same colour, just thinking about where I might place it along in this sort of line that I'm working in. It's not really lines, it's like a collection. And at the moment I haven't got any drips happening, but I will do in a minute because I'm just going to add in some more paint. And I quite like it when you've got some paint on the surface, you can then go in and I'm going to add like a deeper colour into the bottom end of that to give that like a sort of sense of shadow. And I'm now going to build up, add a little bit of extra liquid and paint, and you can see as the reservoirs of paint start to build at the bottom, I can just pump a little bit of water, and there we go, we get a lovely trail coming down. And hopefully what you'll find is as it comes down, it's hitting the wet paper and it's spreading and it's doing something uncontrolled, or something that we weren't necessarily able to control, and down it goes and it spreads down almost like sort of roots forming, putting down roots. So I've got the paley sort of the bluey green, so I wanted to get some yellowy green maybe somewhere into the middle, so I'm going to use some ochre and green, and I'm going to build up an area around here. That's quite a nice dark colour. They're always going to dry a little bit lighter than when you start, so don't worry if they seem dark, they'll come a bit lighter and they get that transformation. So I'm going to add some more yellow into the top of that kind of section. So you can see I've got a sort of slightly yellower, very fractionally brighter colour in there. And I think maybe down on this side we could do with some yellow, just to sort of bring that through the composition. So there's no rules, there's no have to do it this way, have to do it another way. Just where you feel you want to blend your colours in to kind of get them happening together. And again, get some nice, so those sort of like yellowy kind of tones in. And then I think maybe I need to get some into this end here. Just pressing the brush on. So this one is coming out very quite yellowy, which is nice. Just to sort of bring that into that sort of shape. So it's sort of like blobby shapes. I'm going in with some more green in and around there. My green is quite nice and watery. So again, I can just build that bank up. And I just want to give myself stuff to explore and play with, so it doesn't matter at the moment. You know, you could do all sorts of shapes and you can just see what happens and what comes from it. Because we're trying to do something that isn't anything, if that makes sense. You know, we're not thinking, oh, it's going to be a thing. We're just sort of like trying to capture a feeling. I want to get some more in round here with the sort of bluey green coming through. I'm going to leave a little bit of a white margin in between the shapes there because I quite like that drip shape, so I don't want to eat into it too much. But I'm thinking sort of leaf forms, and I'd like to get some yellowy gold drips happening. So I'm going to build up a little reservoir of yellow there. I don't want the shape to be too big, so I'm just going to build up my little reservoir of paint and then put my brush in and pump some water down through it. That's it, and that gives me like a little yellow bit and a sort of small trail working through. And I think I want to get some more greens into this area here. So let's have a look and see what greens I've got going on. Let's mix up a nice green with some deep blue, bit of ultramarine, bit of emerald coming in maybe under here. Just going to slightly avoid that drip. I want to sort of keep that as a sort of space moving through. So I'm just pushing my brush onto the surface again, just to create, and I've got that nice sort of well of dark green. There it goes. I can just move that, get that to move down. Right, so I think some dark green in here, maybe in just underneath. And then when I've got this bit in here, I think we're going to try flipping it over. And so again, just pushing some of that dark green, flat brush, press it onto the paper, almost like dabbing rather than drawing, rather than sort of spreading the paint, we're just sort of drawing it along. So I'm just build up, where I've got that yellow green, I've built some dark green round it into a sort of bank there. So at the moment I've got this row of sort of greeny clouds that are all kind of trailing down. So what I'm going to do now is flip the board upside down. Now you will find that if you've got little reservoirs of paint, they're going to run the other way already, but that's fine because we want it to change around. And it's funny how once you turn it upside down, it looks quite different. It looks sort of weirdly different. It looks like trees kind of growing upwards, or sort of something with a very different feel to it straight away, because these immediately start defying gravity, so they become things like shooting up rather than gently tumbling down. So I'm going to come in along this bottom edge here, and I want to put sort of like not exactly a row, but kind of a sort of a line of paint, but just sort of like on top of, underneath this bottom row. So I'm just going to, like a sort of margin, I'm going to follow the edge of the paint that I've been given. So I'm just leaving a slight margin. You can see that's making those initial shapes stand out. So I'm just using, what I'm looking at is the top edge of this square brush. So I'm just making sure that that is just avoiding those shapes that I've got there. I'm not worrying about the bottom edge, I'm just looking at the top edge and just working my way along, sort of in between these shapes. Just taking a green along that sort of edge. If you do overlap some of them, it hardly matters. It's just, I quite like that sort of white line in between those areas. I think that's something that we can explore later. And then I can move it round and just taking the brush all the way up to the end, following that shape until I hit the masking tape, and that's sort of taken that shape off there. And I can add now that I've got that sort of paint margin, I can come and put my brush on it again, and I can add in a little bit of a yellower tone. So I'm going to come in with my ochre paint just into the bottom edge of that and slightly change that line so it's not just the one green, it's got some depth to it, just by, again, just dabbing, little dabbing motions, just to push that paint onto the paper, and seeing how that changes the feel of that sort of line. And then I want to get some drips going, so I'm going to use a thinner brush because I want to have, I don't know if this will make thinner drips, but we'll see. So I'm going to use a tiny brush, just with a little bit of very wet paint that's more water than paint, and come in so I can add little tiny, like, just keep adding some water, and I've got to get to the point where that's going to overflow. It's resisting, it doesn't want to go, but I'm going to add a little bit more until it does. I'm going to coax it down. If not, I'm going to blow it with a straw. If the worst comes to it. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave these little, thinking of blowing it with a straw, I'm going to leave these little like bombs of paint along this edge, and then when we get the hairdryer, I'm going to blow the hairdryer down onto them, and it will create little sprays. So instead of me having to blow at it, which I'm sure you know, it'll do that bit for me. So I'm just going along and I'm going to add in these little wells of reservoirs of paint. You can see them starting to settle on that edge, which is nice and dark, as I sort of move it through. And they're kind of waiting. They're waiting to see what's going to happen with those. It's quite exciting. Sort of like, you know, anticipating where that's going to go. And then it's like a little sort of, you know, we'll see how it works. And I'm going to add in, I'm going to use this sort of like ochre-y, not ochre, what's the word? Raw sienna kind of colour. I just want to add a little bit of darker tone in it. So in some of these larger areas, again, make sure they're nice and wet, but I'm going to add in onto the ochre. I just want to add in a little bit of that sort of, so you've got that slight toasty feel, like, as I said, like things are just starting to turn in the autumn. So where I've got the brownier tones, I can just add in that with a little bit of ochre. Not ochre, I keep saying that. Raw sienna, which is that orangey brown. And again, they're going to wait, and we're going to see how they're going to grow with the application of the hairdryer, which is the next thing I'm going to do. I think we can always add a bit more, but what I'm going to do now is get my hairdryer, and I'm going to position it above these shapes and blow down. So that's going to hopefully get this to sort of move. So this is the quite exciting discovery bit. I'm going to mute it because you don't all need to hear my hairdryer going at you. And then we will see. We'll see where that's goes. So I'll be back in about a minute. Yes, and you can see, look, it's made all these nice little thin ones, and I like those. I'm actually going to put some more paint on and do it again, because I think I want more of those. So I'm going to go back with another line of paint, or sort of little reservoirs of paint onto that surface, and I'm going to use an ochre green colour again, sort of quite a dry colour. That's a weird thing to say, isn't it? Quite a sort of sandy colour is what I mean. And then I'm going to add in some more paint on that, and then I can do that again because that was fun. I like doing that. I'll do that again. This is my, this is my very considered academic approach to painting. Ooh, that was fun. Let's do that again. And why not? I think that's how it should be. So I'm going to add in plenty of water. And I've got quite a dry paper as well because it's just been all dried off by the hairdryer. So I'm going to add some, and I want to put plenty of water so we get some movement. That's it. And then I'm going to do another quick blast with a hairdryer and see where that takes us. And then we're going to flip it up the other way because this is kind of the upwards world. Right, so let's do another quick dry. There we go. So that's given us quite a lot of sprays, and you could keep on doing that. You could keep on adding sprays in, and you could do things as well, like then turn this just through 90 degrees and have some movement coming across this way, and it's a really good fun thing to explore. But I'm going to just stick my masking tape back down a bit, and then I'm going to flip this right the other way up now. So we have here, this is our sort of direction that we're now getting things in. Let me get this, move this camera a little bit just so I can get everything in. There we go. So that's quite, I think that's got quite interesting. It's quite funny how there's real quite a direction. Things are obviously growing up this way, sort of slightly towards. So my light source in the world is somewhere up here because I think everything is heading out that way. And I'm quite enjoying some of these shapes that I've got in here. So I hope you've got something that's, again, is sort of quite interesting to draw. What I'm seeing in here, what I'm starting to see in here is this is starting to become this sort of large shape, maybe this one, or certainly this one. They're starting to look like sort of seed pods. And you can also imagine those kind of poppies, you know, all those sort of overblown kind of flowers, this sort of shape in here, particularly where they've got this sort of stems coming down to them. So I'm seeing these as sort of like seed pods, flower kind of shapes that are coming through. This is a really lovely one here, and then I've got this, and because these sprays here I think are thinner, then they start to have a sort of, there's a certain amount of depth, and then this becomes in the background and these kind of move into the front a bit. So that's kind of what I'm going to see when I'm drawing. So I'm going to start off with I'm going to start with the green pen. I think if you don't have a green, go for a thinnish black one so that you can we can sort of build up some layers on top. So I'm choosing green because then I can go darker from the green. So if you haven't got a green one to use, then you can use a light black one or a thin black one or grey or something that's not as dark as the chunky one, just so you've got somewhere to go. And now what I want you to look for is just some shapes in here that we can sort of, I'm going to decide that this is going to be a sort of seed head. So I'm going to start just by outlining the shape that I've got there in the paint. So again, just looking to see what the paint has given you, and just take that line. We are thinking very abstract, and I'm not expecting it to look like anything, an identifiable plant. It's just that idea of plants and seeds and growth and growing. So I've got that sort of shape coming in around there, and because I've got this sort of rusty colour in here, I can definitely separate that off, and that's going to be like a sort of, some sort of leftover flowery bit or some kind of opening, like some sort of crest on top of my kind of flower head. And then I'm going to give this a bit of form by using some lines to indicate the shape of it. So because this is sort of round, and hopefully you've got sort of splodges that are kind of sort of round as well, we're going to give some of the lines on either side a kind of curve to help give them that roundness. So if I just do one line kind of coming in round, and then put that curve in so it's sort of on the left hand side, so it's curving slightly towards the left. And then if I show you on the right hand side, I can put a curve in that way. And then I can, as I come towards the centre, my lines are going to be just fractionally straighter, like that, and it's sort of segmenting up this, and as I go towards the edges, those lines are going to have slightly more of a curve, and hopefully you're seeing that's just helping to define a form a bit. It's kind of giving it a bit of form. Let me zoom in a bit closer, so you can see. That's a bit close. You can kind of see there's sort of a shape like a sort of pumpkin, maybe tiny pumpkin kind of appearing. And if you want to keep the shape being rounded, what we can do is decide that these sort of bits on the side are like sort of frills. So I can do some lines inside going the other way. Look, they're sort of stretching up and away from that edge, like that, sort of coming away, and they're also then helping to let this round shape that I've created in the middle kind of pop out. So I can put little lines, but honestly we're just trying to give it a little tiny bit of form, any kind of shape that you want to find in these. You might be seeing a leaf shape, you might be seeing something that's more like a kind of flower, you might just keep it really kind of abstract, you know, through there. So I'm just going to do a few more lines in, and if you get some wide apart lines in first to kind of establish that sort of shape, you can then go back and add in more lines to kind of give more form and more sort of direction, and you can fit them in between the ones that are there. I've got quite a nice sort of paint pattern here, so with this one I'm just going to follow that wiggle of paint I've got going through there, because I don't want to forget my paint wiggles as they're there. I can even draw around it, and then that becomes like something sitting on the surface, you know, like a little crusty bit of some sort. And then I can bring some more lines. And if I do a few more near the side of the shape that I've got, then in my old adage, the more lines you put on, the darker that makes them, and it gives it a bit of shadow. So if you want to make something look darker, you add more lines, and then the closeness together of those lines takes away the background, and it makes the pen colour a bit more dominant. So I can just sort of move. So I've got sort of a shape there. It's not being dramatically, you know, oh yes, gosh, that's a so-and-so plant. It's just got that feel of kind of plantiness. And I've got this nice leaf shape. Well, it's sort of, I'm going to see it as a leaf, this kind of green splodge down here. So I want to get some sort of veining into that leaf, or some sort of shapes as well. So with this one, I'm going to make it stand out differently, I'm going to maybe go for a black pen on here. So we've got like a nice combination. And I'm just going to start again by finding an edge. So just come round, just defining that edge. So that's the first thing you do. You don't have to worry about where it's going. You're just going to follow that round with a pen so that you can clearly see what you've got going on with this shape here. And it's tricky, I suppose, because all of you have got slightly different shapes, but it's also beautiful because you can use the same kind of technique and yet yours will be unique to you. So it's just starting off by finding the next clear blobby bit of green that you can go round. And then in my one, I've got this sort of definitely darker area inside, like a sort of cloud of dark that I've put in. So I'm going to draw around that. I'm just going to see what that looks like if I concentrate on it and just bring pen line coming through. And it disappears a bit here, so I'm just going to make it up, and then it reappears to around there. And there I've got like two sort of lines on that shape, and that kind of gives me maybe an inside and an outside, maybe. So to make that, you know, more of an inside and an outside, I'm going to bring some lines up to that edge, make them nice, and imagine this is sort of curling up. So any kind of lines will work, because as long as we do something different on the inside. But I'm thinking of like those sort of ribs you get on the underside of a big leaf. You know, they have those sort of strong structural kind of ribs coming underneath. And then so here they're kind of curling round just to sort of define that edge, curling up like that. And then for the inside, again, you might want to swap colours. You might want to go to a lighter pen, a thinner pen, so that the line you're drawing is not going to be as strong. I've got this one here. This is sort of a neon, so green. So this may not work at all, but let's see what it does. So I'm going to do lines, but they're going to come in and they're going to disappear at that edge. So when they come down to the edge, that I've defined, they're going to stop, and that just gives the feeling that they're going inside. So this makes it more sort of cup-like, or sort of so it's more like a hollow. Just, you know, and even if it doesn't do it massively, it kind of does it a bit. So, you know, it just gives it a slightly different feel. They are there, they're a little bit fainter, but they're just giving it that kind of feel. And then if I want to make these ones on the outside stronger and more like a sort of planty kind of feel. So I'm going to double them up. I'm just going to do 2 now. So they've got 2 struts, like the sort of umbrella struts coming through. So let's make them a bit more dramatic. Just following the lines that I've already drawn, that's all, just repeating them so they're coming back in like that. But I'm just sort of thinking, you know, abstract growing things, nothing too definite at the moment. And I can even do a few lines just coming off that edge and just flicking back into that space, and that's going to darken that line that I've defined at the edge and make it stand out a bit more against what's going on behind. Just adding like little shading moments coming on through, just to get all that round. And that's just something a bit different. And you could imagine again how, you know, if you've got, you don't have to imagine because I'm going to do it, if you've got a white pen, you could, where you've got the pale line, you can add, if it's going to work, wakey wakey. Come on, white pen, don't give up on me now. Let's try with the dry, when it gets a bit dry, although it hasn't been that dry recently. Let's try different. I think that one might have given up the ghost. This one, yeah, okay, so this one, I can add some white lines coming in alongside those green ones, and that looks like light, looks like highlight kind of coming in, brightening that up a bit. But that's just sort of playing with that. You know, we can come back, we can work on them more. We've got a nice little sort of, I've got a little tiny sort of this one here, so let's have a look at that one. Let's go in with some black pen again and just turn that into a seed head sort of shape, just moving that round and just drawing into where they've got those little bits of extra paint, sort of colour kind of coming through, just so I can go. I'm going to do some lines coming over the top of that darker area of brown. So, and then just bring them up through those 2 sides, and it starts to look like a bud. And then I can come down its stem, drawing that a bit more, and just following the little shapes that I've got. We can come back to that in a bit more, but that's just starting to define that. Then we've got this lovely area, haven't we, that's part of this big sort of seed head up here. So I'm going to go back to the green pen I was using, which will help to kind of locate this as being part of this flower. So again, let's outline that where I want it to go, and it just goes up into that bit, so I can make that a bit more defined. And then I can put, maybe I can put some surface onto this, so I can put in some circles and shapes into that to kind of give it more structure. Just wiggle a line through that in the green, and again just maybe finding a little shape in the paint I can isolate and go around a couple of times, just sort of moving through, make that stand out from its background, just sort of giving texture, giving surface, just seeing where they want to go. And that kind of is still part of that, but it's something a bit different. Then this one here, on this one, look, I've got, again, these 2 sort of quite dark areas. So if I come up here, like I did with the ochre one, and I can just go round those. I'm just looking to see where the paint is taking me. I'm not trying to impose a shape on the paint. I'm letting that paint be and just seeing what the paint has given me. So again, I can come in around here. And so much of it is just the colours that you've got. The colours immediately speak of plants and growing and things, and then that's so that you can sort of find the shapes because you're kind of already in plant zone. So I'm going to come down its stem and darken that up. And then I've got this area up here. I can come back to that, or I can do maybe some swirly lines coming up and letting them just disappear a bit towards the top, because that starts to make it look like it's something softer. So my lines are coming up, and then I'm just sort of like maybe bring them into dots, like bringing those sort of dotted lines up, and that sort of continues the line, but it makes them look softer and less well defined. Down the bottom here I'm going to put them closer together because it's sort of more tightly packed inside that flower bud, but it's just going to bring them growing up through that space and up and up and up. And so I've got sort of like a lighter kind of line work feel. I've got this shape here. This one, I think this could be a kind of leaf on a stem, I think. So again, just find the edge of it. And if I wanted to, I could exaggerate that shape to give it more sort of spikiness. So just taking the shape that's there and pushing it a bit further, maybe bringing it behind some of the others. So it's just a sort of larger shape. I could follow it completely. I can decide what I want to do. And then I'm going to put like a sort of central bit, and then I've got this knobbly stem, so I'm going to increase those knobbles because the paint is really spread out there. So I'm going to kind of, where I've got a knobble, I'm just going to bring it out into like a sort of spiky. So this is becoming a sort of thistly-ish, you know, one of those plants that you know you don't want to pick because it's going to give you a skin rash or something, you know, like one of those hogweeds or something. It's got that sort of spiky kind of feel that I've just exaggerated just by pulling it further. And there's like a very big area of paint here. It's very misty, so I'm going to start off just by deciding where the edge of that is and just bringing my pen round there and pulling that kind of out, exaggerating it a bit, moving it around, and that's going to be a kind of like outline frill on the paint on the stem. So I'm going to imagine that this thin sort of spiky stem is coming through here. So I'm just drawing that on where I want it to be. And I can put some spikes in again because it sort of like relates to what's going on above. And then I'm going to use just some lines to make this again look more like a kind of frill or a leaf. So I can just bring some of these lines coming out from here. And you can use all sorts of colours. We can go back and add detail onto this. But, you know, we're just sort of, you can always sort of go over and you do one kind of level, you know, you can get all the main bits you can see, and then you can go back in and add more colours and more detail. Once you've seen all the sort of obvious bits, you can then go back and add extras into them. You could go back and put a texture up. You know, you could decide to isolate, you know, like do an outline, more of an outline along here, and then you could fill this stem in with a texture to kind of give it a bit more form and a bit more surface. But it's sort of got quite a nice, weird planty kind of feel. I don't know if that's an actual adjective, but weird planty is going to be an adjective now. That's what we're after. We're creating our weird kind of surreal hedgerow. And then you can take some white lines, maybe white pen work, if one of these blooming white pens is not going to let me down today. They're very temperamental, much as I love them. I can get them to work, it's great. They're not so keen on the paint surface, but, you know, they're quite subtle, and I think they add quite, you can just get quite a lot of work on, but they're quite subtle in their sort of feel. It just sort of brings a bit of lightness, which might not even be coming, it may look like a visible drawing on the paper, on the camera, I'm not sure. But this one here, look, this sort of big, I've got a lovely big sort of like a puff, you know, and I'm just thinking I don't want to kind of completely draw around that, but I've got this sort of shape falling round it, which could be a kind of leaf. So I'm going to work on this bit first, I think, and then I'll decide how we can keep the puffiness of this lovely sort of spread. I might not even touch it, you know, I might just leave it as it is. So with this one, I'm going to use a bit of a brown pen. I've got different brown pens. I've got some sepia ones. But brown felt tip will work really well. So if you've got your, you know, if you've gone and bought some kids' felt tips, as long as you've got a fine-ish nib, that's going to work really nicely. But because this is browning, I want to bring this sort of brown colour into it. So again, just following around here, just to that bit. I've got a nice sort of dark centre in here. So I'm going to sort of define that shape there. So it's like almost like a little hat on top. And then I've got a shape kind of coming through here where there's a borderline between the sort of ochre colour. And I'm not trying to sort of say this is the thing, this is this thing, but it's just sort of giving it, feel. And I'm thinking maybe up here we could get some texture in if I do some circles. So this sort of, in the way you get like acorns in an acorn cup, I sort of feel that this is sort of, whatever this is, it's in a little cup sort of sitting in here. So it's got that seedy kind of seed pod feel. Absolutely, I do adore seed pods. I love it in the autumn when you get all these incredible sort of structural, like empty poppy heads and things. I always find them so fascinating because they're so sort of architectural. I'm just going to bring those circles all the way up, so it's become like sort of quite textured with this little sort of hat sitting on it. And then again, I can put some lines through it just to give it a kind of bulbous feel, just sort of moving down. And again, if you keep them so that they open out in the middle and then come down to a point, or come down to the same point, should I say, not a point, but sort of gather into one section, it sort of gives it a nice flow and a rhythm. And that sort of comes through just to give it a kind of form like that. So it got something, I don't know what that is, but whatever it is, it's doing its thing there. I can come back in and I can use some of the black pen maybe in between some of these circles. That's just going to strengthen them up and sort of give some little shadow. Not round every single one maybe, but just sort of in between. A little bit like we did with the raspberries last week, but we're just kind of scribbling a little bit of darkness into that, just to give it a bit more oomph. And another thing you can do is where you've drawn the brown lines, you can do a black line that follows the brown line but peters out sort of halfway, and that adds a nice little touch of shadow to that bottom edge and makes that a bit sort of more defined. And I think want to get some texture into this little bit of brown here too, because I'm sort of seeing that as being somehow related, bringing that through. And I can get some texture, and this is going to open out, look into sort of larger shapes as if it's sort of part of it. But I think one of the things I found most inspiring with sort of developing all this was I found a book in a jumble sale back in the day when we had jumble sales, and it was a book of Victorian. It's going to sound like the strangest thing to be interested in, but it's a book of views down a microscope, Victorian microscopes, translated into drawings. So it's cross sections of plant structures and cells and things, but all hand drawn, but from looking down a microscope. So a discussion of fossilised and living plants. I don't think I've ever read a single word of it, but there's something so fascinating about the images, and they're all these sort of like strange, sort of like almost abstract cell pictures, and I've never forgotten them, and they're really amazing to sort of look at. And I think a lot of where my strange ideas come from, bizarrely. You never know when inspiration's going to hit. It's So I'm going to go for a larger green pen, and where I've got this sort of edge up here, I'm going to use my darker green pen to kind of bring a nice bold line through there. I'm coming back to the fluffy. I haven't abandoned it, but I'm just sort of deciding what to do with it. So I'm just using this green marker to kind of work around some of these sort of upwards, and it's got some nice kind of lines I can find in it because it's got sort of rows of, because we did those stripes going along, we've got different edges that we can kind of pick out. So I'm just picking some of those out, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these lines down and then fade them out into that sort of fluffy. So I'm going to do some thick ones all sort of pointing down towards it from that edge, a bit like some of the frills that we've done, like that. So they're quite chunky lines. And then I'm going to get my thinner green pen. So if you've got black pens, you can do this in black. You could do it in, but sort of vary the size of the pen. So where's my, so I'm going to take that green line and I'm going to then extend it into that sort of fluffiness, but this of not, so it's sort of poking into it, but just interacting with it, moving that down through like that. And then on this underneath edge, I'm going to define that a little bit more, and then bring some of these spikes kind of coming up into that softness. And I need to sort of relate it into that somehow. So, but it's just sort of thinking, how can I blend these two together? Just seeing what, again, my favourite phrase, see what the paint has given me to play with. And so I can use green coming in, maybe up round here. Just some little thin green lines, so they're kind of like somehow related. And then that sort of then becomes like a sort of fluff ball, like a sort of a seed head of some sort coming through there. Right, I'm just going to very quickly plug my laptop in, which I realise I haven't done before that runs out. And there we go, that's good. Right, so I'm grabbing a cup of tea as well, which has always been, as ever now, gets put tantalisingly just out of reach. But there we go, what's better. Okay, so we've got that sort of side in. I think we're going to move across and have a look at this side, because there's some really nice big shapes on that side that we haven't touched at all yet. So let me just get my camera to swing over that way a bit. I haven't got a lot of room to move the board over, but I can do a tiny bit. Come on, camera. Excuse me, everything's going to go sideways for a second. That's a bit better. So now we can see where we are, a bit there. Turn that round. There, so we've got all this nice stuff in. And this is another great big, look, this is a great big fat seed head sitting here, and it's got another bit of rust in it here. So I can use that, what I've used on this one, to kind of relate it across so that you've got this feeling that they're, if not the same species, but similar. So I'm going to draw round the rusty bit first. So if you've got a shape like this with a strong, like this sort of cap that we can build up, then you can pick it out with a pen like this and bring the lines up and through. And this one, because I'm lucky, I've got this rusty bit of colour coming through here, so I can claim this all for this seed head. So this seed head's going to have this sort of like cap on the top, really sort of dramatic sort of shape just coming up like that. And then underneath I've got an area here which can kind of be another one of these frills along the side, and maybe under here as well. But I'm going to take this line through here, lovely spockles and spettles of paint just sort of coming through there. I'm going to start with building this here. I've got this sort of nice double kind of dribble, so I'm going to turn this into a kind of joining point, or sort of like a bud, I suppose, where that's going to come up into. So at the moment I've just drawn around the outline of that to give that sort of a more weight. And then here I'm going to include this bit, but I can see a line on this side, which is this sort of side of my pod, and then I've got a little edge here which is going to become the sort of wing coming round like that. So then I've got this sort of, you can see a similar kind of feel happening on this one, and this bit here, this is going to become another one of whatever these leaves are. So I'm going to use black on that one, swap pens to black. Tiny black, I want about a 0.5 black, and then this is going to become this sort of umbrella leaf that we've done previously, and that's going, and by making that a bit darker, it's going to help to bring this to pop forwards, and then it's going to push this back a bit, so it definitely looks like it's going behind. So I just define that leaf shape there, and then I'm going to take these sort of struts that we did before on this one, or the same idea anyway, and just bring those behind, and they're going to stop at the edge of this seed pod, so they definitely look like they're travelling on behind it to help give it some perspective. So it's just thinking about where the layers are and thinking, how can I enhance the feeling of one behind the other, so I can bring those up through there. That's it. So I've got that sort of spray on this side, and I could go back and do some more shading like I did on this one. So I can, we could go back in and we can do some shading lines maybe in between those struts where it's disappearing off, to add a bit of shadow and tone. There's plenty more we can do, and I can take those just to make that, again, just sort of locate that in space. I've got this shape under here. I'm going to come back to this one, don't worry, but this one on here, this I think is going to be another sort of seed head sort of going on behind. Nice sort of overlapping areas here. So if you've got a nice sort of overlap like this, then I'm going to use my darker green just to, there's a slight sort of pinky sienna bit, so I'm going to slightly just ignore, sort of like, you know, define round that, so I can treat that a bit as if it's a sort of something that's different happening up here. And I'm going to put some strong chunky green lines through here. Again, just really simple patterns. They're not complicated, they're just lines, but with that little bit of a curve on them, just sort of radiating, fanning out from that central point. It just helps to give that a little bit of form and shape. Just sort of coming out from that central spoke in the middle there. So that just helps to kind of give that shape. I don't want this one to disappear because I think this needs to be stronger now, because these are quite strong lines. So now that I've seen that, I'm going to go back in with a darker pen and add a bit more heft, I think, to this one here, just with this brush pen in black, and really make that stand out, just to sort of bring that definitely in front, adding some stronger line in. And we can use this in all sorts of ways. We're going to build up more and more texture on these as we go. So I quite like that dark line. So again, I can use some of those, like just coming onto the lines that I've already drawn, like we did in the one there where we'd use black on the brown lines. I'm just darkening up some of the lines halfway along and then taking them to an edge out like that and darkening up that edge, and it's just starting to make it look, increasing that sort of curving feel that we're getting just by sort of adding an extra darkness. I'm going to do the same thing on these ones here. So where they're disappearing off behind the plant, I'm going to add just a little stripe of black into those while I think about it, just to sort of bring those darker. And then what I can do is then get the chunkier green pen, or you could use pencils on top of this. You can use colour pencils, you can colour in to work onto it. I'm going to add some, continue those lines out, but in green, so they're not as dark as the black. And again, that's just a way of getting different tones in, and then let them fade out into the kind of paint lines. Let's do that on here as well, because that's working quite nicely. So just bring some of those lines up into there. And then on this one here, so I've got this green pen in hand, I can add in some lines, but just at the bottom half, and then let them fade out. So I'm following the line I've already drawn in, but I'm just letting them fade halfway. And what that is hopefully doing is getting more colour and more shadow into the bottom half of this round shape, and it gives it that more, here's my word of the day, globular. What a good word that is, a globular feel, which means globe-like, but globular, it's such a lovely word. But it's just going to increase that feel of this being a round object just by giving that bit of extra shadow on it. So I've got this sort of brown one here, so I think I quite like to enhance the kind of rusty kind of quality here by using brown pen again on this one. You could use red pen as well. That works quite well on top of brown colours because it gives it that kind of slightly glowing edge. So if you've got like red biro or red pen, that'll work really nicely on top of that. I'm just trying to find a brown pen of that's not too thin. Here we go. This is a nice chunky one. So I'm going to do my lines again. Again, just they don't have to be complicated shapes, but we're just thinking about the way they're going to describe that shape. So they're going to curl like out and then round again. So they've got that roundness. So they're just starting to give me form as well as texture and as well as colour. So I'm just going to move them up like that through the space, and that starts to give it a lovely kind of round quality just by making sure that they curve over the shape, and you can see them all kind of coming from one point there, and I've got kind of like, is this one going behind, is it going in front? I don't know, doesn't matter, let's just let it do its thing. Then I've got this sort of bit where it's holding it like a sort of seed case maybe, so I'm going to go to town on this bit and make it sort of give it some pattern, give it some surface decoration. I've already got a green outline, so I'm going to go over that with the brown, and that just has the effect of making the brown stronger, so I get a nice strong outline on that. Same here, bring those over, and I've got all sorts of patterns here like I can explore with my pen, sort of swirly mottled kind of patterns that I'm going to draw in, following the paint marks that I've got there, letting them spray out to give me a sort of a lovely textured, there is a word for this, I think it's a calyx, but I'm not 100% sure, not being a botanist. And then where I've got the white paper in between, I'm going to do some circles just to fill in that. So again, that's giving me texture. It's giving me texture, it's giving me some surface. It's also giving me a bit of interest and shadow on that white paper. So I'm just squeezing lots of little circles in together, and it has that sort of slightly seed-like quality. So that's kind of given that like a nice, something interesting happening here. And then I've got, again, my big sort of lines coming up. If I want to make them thicker, I can just do slight double lines alongside them again to get that shadowy feel. And it's just sort of thinking, this is my strange magical flowers, so they can do anything I want them to. They don't have to, they don't have to be representational, but yet they're still looking like they could be something that's grown in a hedgerow. They're still looking like something. I could imagine sort of, little fairies and pixies and stuff living in these sort of amongst all these little seed heads. So I'm going to do my circles again in here because I've done the circles over here and here, so it's kind of referencing them. So it's that thing again of saying, right, these are seed heads, people. This is what I'm doing is seed heads. So although all these shapes are unfamiliar, they're also, in a weird way, familiar. They're also referencing things that actually happen. So it gives them their own reality. Like that. And I've got I think I do a few more lines down here. If I do half lines, again, in between the initial lines, that starts, again, it's adding more shadow. So it's starting to describe that shape a bit like, giving it a bit more solidity. This one down here, I think I need to push this one backwards. I need to have a bit more shadow into it. So I'm going to fit some circles in between those lines that we've drawn. So, and as they go down, they're going to fit smaller and smaller into that space. And that's going to give me surface. But again, as they're following those lines, as the lines get bigger, the circles get bigger. And that really helps this sort of feeling of perspective. But as I'm putting the bolder ink colours on, it's also making that a bit darker. So it's giving it some shadow. And it's just keeping on building up these textures and surfaces. And you can go on and on adding to them. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep on working on maybe one of these and keep thinking of different ways to add to it. So you could see how far you can take these by adding different colours and sort of surfaces into what you've got. And, we were talking earlier about, how far can you go with a picture? And sometimes, as we were saying, we felt that the one we were looking at was perfect the way it was and we didn't want to do anything more to it. And this, I'm going to keep on working on some of these now and seeing how much more we can add and where it takes us, and how far we can go. So I'm just adding in all those circles along there to give me kind of texture and give me form in there. And then let's get some. This one, I love this sort of, got like a sort of skirt down here. It's like a sort of tutu sort of coming down. Oh, it looks like it's got like a sort of, like it's sort of got something very fluffy happening down here. So I think I'm going to work on that to bring that up a bit. And I've started off in black with this one. So I'm going to start with a thinner black pen just to pick out all the little wiggles and wobbles coming down. And then I think I'm going to sort of play with this tutu feel. So I'm going to find all the little, find all the little wiggles and squiggles and splodges that this paint has created. And it's lovely because when you get these really sort of fluffy moments like this in the paint, you've got so much to kind of explore, and it's quite over the top, you know, and you can sort of see them all and keep adding. So once you've got that outline in, it becomes really quite sort of a fantastic sort of splat. If you want to get more splats like that to happen, like really spread out, this is where the squeezy bottle or the spray bottle of water is really useful, because you can just keep spraying and spraying the surface, and it will give the paint or the ink much more to spread, and it will move it around. And so I'm just adding in, just finding little wiggles of paint and bringing those up, following through that green. And you can see how I've got this sort of, now this very sort of fluffy, I don't know what's happening, but like, you know, fantastic tutu flower. There's a space there, so I'm going to draw around that space. It's got more kind of fluffies going in. And then if I wanted to, I could add some, again, some lines. So if I like take on the side there, I can put some lines coming from that edge out into that space, and that's going to add a little bit of tone. And I do know I'm starting to work a bit faster because I want to get a fair bit of this done, so you can see where you can take it. Obviously, you don't have to be working at this speed, and I think, you know, what's important is that you're looking at the shapes you've got and just seeing what you can pick out and where you can take them. You can always say to yourself, well, what's the next bit I can see to do? Just think one bit ahead. Go, right, well, there's a shape there. I'm going to focus on that shape for a bit next. I'm not going to worry about where the rest of it is going. I'm just going to focus on that one bit and see where my pen's going to go on that. And then when I've done that one, then I can find the one more to do. So I'm not trying to think, oh, I've got to get all of this done. I'm thinking I'm going to get the next bit done, and then I'll stop and have a break. And then you go, oh, well, I'll just do one more bit. And then you go, well, I can see that bit, I can do that bit, now that I've seen that bit, I can definitely do that bit. And then that's how you get it done, isn't it? You just keep saying, well, I'm not going to try and do all of it, I'm just going to do one more bit. And because I, you know, think, oh, I've done so much on this, I can't think where else to go. Well, I can just put a little bit more into that one, so I'll do that. And then you can keep on exploring. So here I'm just using my black pen again, and I'm just making sure the lines are doing something a different direction than the ones on the sort of surface, so they don't lead into each other. So we keep them as being separate entities. So that's just sort of like pick that up a bit more. I'm going to have one last battle with a white pen because I want it to work. But then I can come in, so like on this one up here, I can add in some, using the white, I'm going to add some circles into this sort of surface. And they are going to add light, so I'm going to keep them sort of towards the top. I hope that sort of, it's so hard to see it because it's quite subtle, but it is coming out on the paper. I think if you get to see the scan, it'll make more sense. But I can just come in, it's also because it's quite a pale paint, you can see, look, where I'm adding into the darker circles in the sort of rusty colour, then that's sort of helping to make them stand out and to sort of be a bit bolder and sort of come round. Another thing I wanted to try on this one was to use some gold pen, because gold pen can look really lovely on this sort of surface. So here I can add in some gold. They're really hard. The only trouble with gold pens is I love them, and you can see they're sort of really, they just add a really lovely colour to them. They don't come out very well on a scan or on a camera, because what you miss is that when you change position, the light just catches them and it adds a sort of whole other dimension to them. So the moment it's just going to look like a sort of sandy colour, which is working quite nicely. But I think, you know, do have a go with some, if you can get some metallic pens. They're usually dead cheap to get hold of. You can get some and work with them, and then you get, just add that, you know, little bit of gold highlight to it. It's can be quite magical. And I don't think there's anything wrong with adding a bit of bling or glitter pens or anything. Why not? You know. So I'm just going to add some of this colour through on these. It's working quite well with the ochre. Just to sort of add some more lines in like that. And then, right, I'd like to get some really strong, I'd like to get some quite strong lines into some of these. So this one here, maybe where I've got this dark green lines, I'm going to come back with my pen and bring some black lines in the lower half of those lines. Again, just going over the ones that I've already drawn, because that will bring in shadow and it will bring in sort of structure. I'm going to get some more onto this sort of edge round here, like that's coming down. Now I'd like to sort of add I want to add some more kind of like berry-like kind of form. So we've got some more kind of fruity kind of feel going on. But I haven't got a lot of paint. I've actually sort of drawn quite a lot of them on. So I think I'm going to just start adding some in. I'm going to do sort of clusters of like round shapes coming in as if they're sort of behind, just because I want to get some different surface in. Just maybe falling down the side of here into this sort of shape. And some of them are going to disappear behind, some of them are going to be in front, and then to get them the sort of berry-like feel, I can add like a little sort of star shape in the middle, and that starts to look like the little calyx or the little sort of stalk end where a berry might come. And I'm not going to be afraid of using quite dark colours into some of these, because it's going to give them a kind of richness and a background that I can build up on. So I'm just flicking a little bit of black sort of in between, and then I want to get a bit of colour. So this is where I can use green pen again, and maybe just stripes again, but they're all going to radiate out from that centre point coming round to start getting that feeling of roundness in. Just to sort of bring those different texture and different depth. If I had some painty trails coming down, I could then draw these on top of those and then incorporate those painty trails into it and give them a more kind of paint colour. I can always go back and do more painting. There's nothing to stop us going back and adding extra paint if we feel we could just use some dots of paint to be kind of like fruits and things in amongst all of those. But that's just adding sort of like a different kind of background in. This leaf here, I feel I kind of want to get a stalk into it as well, and I haven't got one, so again I could paint a stalk in to that, just to sort of add it round. Let's have a look at some of what's going up here as well, because we could do with bringing some of this into the design. So let's find some edges in here. I'm going to use my brown pen because I've got this more sepia brown kind of colour, so I'm just finding some edges and defining those, and I'm going to bring them down with some lines and letting the lines just fade out so that they're disappearing into that white section, so they're not going completely up into the seed heads in front, and just helps to bring them in. And then we can get another row kind of coming up, and then let's think about these uprights here. How could we work on those? I'm going to bring these lines so they tuck in closer together, and that helps to give them a bit more shadow. Follow up these sort of lines, and then I can bring some clusters of shapes into these, and maybe some spininess as well, so they've got more of a kind of things growing up kind of feel coming round, you know. And we can add, I've gone off the screen a bit there. Let's tilt up a bit so you can kind of see. Let's come into these ones here. So again, I'm just following those layers of paint that I've got, because I've used that sort of technique of building up a stripe at the beginning and then working on it. So bring this along and take my lines down through there, so it's sort of got that frill feel, just to work those through. So they're just flicking, so I'm flicking the lines, I'm not drawing them all the way down, I'm letting them flick off, and that just lets them fade into that sort of background. And again, I can cluster in some different shapes. I can get some green pen and cluster some circles in sort of behind there. And I hope you're finding that, you know, you're finding things to draw, you're finding things to explore with what you're doing, and you're kind of getting this feel of growth and hedgerows and things alive, even though these things aren't real, you know, aren't sort of like naturalistic things, but they've got all those qualities about them. So I'm hoping that you're finding I hope you're enjoying this process, and that you're discovering all these interesting botanical specimens that are as yet unknown to science. But also, I think what we're trying to do is kind of get this feeling of shadow and shade into them by using, so where you want to get more darkness in, like under here I feel I want to get that a bit darker. I'm just using lines close together to kind of work over that surface to bring more shadow in, and that's making it more shadowy and darker. So we've got that edge, and then on this one here I'm going to use some green, maybe just coming out from that edge so it's starting to shadow, and bring that back so that that's got a sense of moving in as well. And just keeping on thinking, well, where do I need to make it darker? How can I make it darker? Oh, I know, I can use just some lines close together or some black pen close together. Let's have a look at this one here. Look, he could do some more work. I must stop personifying everything, but I do have a habit of doing that, so sorry. So I'm going to add some gold onto that green, just some more circle shapes maybe, and then some stripes coming down just to keep working, thinking about all those textures I can get into the surface. You know, so it's got this sort of feeling of things growing and the surface is slightly decaying, and there's something weirdly beautiful about flowers that have gone over, that are sort of starting to decay, and you know, their structures are all becoming bare. And I always think, you know, that flowers are such amazing things. They're beautiful when they're in full bloom, but they also have this sort of slightly melancholy beauty when they're kind of, the colours fading and things are sort of, holes are appearing in them. I always find them really attractive at that point as well. Perhaps more interesting to draw, you know, than when they're in their pristine Chelsea garden kind of level. So I'm just coming in and using black into some of these sort of circles just underneath, just like a little bit like, again, like we did with the raspberries, just to kind of increase the shadow under them, and that kind of makes them stand out a bit more. And again, I can still decide to have more shadow kind of following some of those edges that I've got in dark. I can bring some black into that, and that's going to make them darker as well. And I'm just following the lines that I've drawn, and just sort of, now they're almost becoming like sort of ridges or fins kind of moving up through the shape. And it just becomes really interesting to see how you can make them have their sort of reality, have their growing space out of what is just sort of like falling paint, you know. And I think this chap needs this seed head needs a stalk. I want it to have a stalk coming down. So I'm just going to draw something in, just, you know, with a sort of like a knobbly bit at the top, and then it doesn't have to be perfect, but it's just a kind of, and then I think this now also wants to sort of have a stem too. So let's just bring that so it's sort of tucking behind that shape there. So that's sort of got a bit more kind of thing that's got, but I need to get this of colour to translate through a bit. So I'm going to use my thick green pen just to bring that darker sort of colour through. It's just a marker pen, but it's just quite nice to sort of have that. And this green here is a more bluey green. I could totally do this in paint, by the way. I'm just doing it in pen for speed, really. But you could totally repaint, add some more stems and things, then, you know, you don't have to leave it as it is. This one, because it's this green, I need to get some of these sort of green colours in so I can build up. And I'm just kind of giving it a sort of texture again, just by creating white bubbles and then drawing the sort of green in and around it like that, sort of coming down. If you've got colour pencils, you can totally use those. You know, you can do pen, then you can do shading in colour pencil. Watercolour pencils are fantastic because you can can't control where you want to shade them in, and then you can get a bit of water and kind of pull and bleed the colours out, a bit like the paint. So it's a more controlled way of working. Watercolour pencils, I always say to people, they're the one thing, I'm a massive advocate for finding cheap and cheerful art materials, because you shouldn't be able to, you should feel that you can do a huge amount with cheap and cheerful stuff, and you shouldn't feel that you have to buy sort of £5 each things, you know, and things that are going to cost you £100 to get even a decent set of colours. On the other hand, the one thing that I would say is worth spending your money on is watercolour pencils. I find if you buy cheap watercolour pencils, they never properly kind of spread. They kind of be quite dry. And I've just remembered these pens are quite cheap, and in conversely, what they do, which is fantastic, is that they also run when you put water on them. Because look, I've just drawn that with the green pen, and then I can come in with a brush of wet brush of wet water, good grief, as opposed to dry water that you have, the famous dry water. Yeah. Oh my goodness, that's me in my round circles again, isn't it? But yes, you can just come in, look, with a bit of water on your brush, and so it's always good fun to test out your pens, because some of them will do this, and often they don't tell you they're going to do it, and you know, they don't make, but actually it's really fantastic that they do, because you can see how I can come in and just sort of slightly spread that paint again and just give it that softened kind of feel, which as I remember means that this one here will do a similar thing. So let's see if we can get to work on this one as well. So where I've got my green pen in, yes, look, I'm just coming in with a wet brush and I can kind of soften and pull out that line. And it's worth trying all your pens and seeing if they do this. If they say they're waterproof, they won't do it, but some of the cheaper ones aren't that waterproof, and I think they're fantastic because you can do this sort of stuff with them. Yeah, so cheap pens, expensive pencils, I think, is my takeaway message from this, that it's worth investing in expensive, or relatively expensive, the Derwent ones, or the I don't wish to be branded, I can't think of the other ones now, the Swiss one make that's really good. All of those sort of ones where they're like £2.50 a pencil. I think it's better to have a basic range of those in colours you can blend together than having and I know, because I did a special offer, and got tempted and bought 120 watercolour pencils for sort of £30 and thought, wow, these are amazing, and they're absolutely useless. They're very, very waxy, they hardly spread at all. You don't get any paint out of them, and they don't seem to really like going on drawn surfaces. So yes, don't they're not really worth it. So it's a false economy, as they say. So now you can see, now I can come in. Oh, this is exciting, isn't it? Look, I can come in and just sort of pull out these edges and soften them, and it gives it its fantastic quality. I get very excited about the quality of lines. I described myself as a line nerd the other day. I can occasionally just draw a line on a piece of paper, and there's something about it. I just go, oh my God, look at that line. And everyone else is going, what do you mean it's a line? I said, I know, but look at it. It's the way it goes across the paper, the little indent it makes, and everyone's like, oh yeah, she's off again. Right, but I think that's really lovely, because that's just given me, so you can see how if you could do that, you could go along in watercolour pencil and just give yourself some shading around there, and then go in with the wet brush and kind of pull it around. So finally, I think I want to do a stem, maybe coming down from this one as well, as I've got my pen handy. So this one I'm doing in sepia pen. These ones I know don't run, so I'm going to have to do something else clever with them. So I'm just drawing in, and it can be just quite a wobbly line, doesn't have to be a perfect straight line, because they're plants, so they're not perfectly straight. So wibbly wobbly kind of, oh, you can't see, let's tilt the camera so you can actually see what I'm doing, that would be quite good. Wibbly wobbly line kind of coming down there, and again I can just build it up with some more wiggly lines in between, so I don't even have to do an outline to begin with. I can just sort of do a flowing load of overlapping brown pen lines like that, just drawing down from there, and then that's given me a kind of surface. It's not just a flat line, it's got something else happening to it. And then I can take black pen again and work into that, which just means going over some of the shapes that I've put in to add some shadow. And of course, because we know that those pens aren't going to run, so I may be able to very quickly grab, if my watercolour pencils that do work are to hand, so I can grab one of those maybe. Is that a watercolour pencil? Apparently, right. So this is a brown watercolour pencil, so just show you what you can do. I can add in some of the watercolour pencil so that I can pull it out with wet paint. Oh, I've done it again, wet water again. And so I'm going to just colour in. Doesn't have to be very careful. I'm just colouring some watercolour pencil on there, so I've got some, as it were, like a reservoir of pigment there, and then wet my brush and just sort of get that to fade and pull. And what happens is the pen that you've already got there, that's going to stay put, that's not going to move in this case. So you can see the texture that you've done in the pen kind of coming through it, and you can kind of spread the colour and give it this sort of nice halo effect. And this is a technique you can use all the way around if you want to increase. So if I wanted to make some more of these sort of berry shapes and I wanted to give them a bit more colour and a bit more depth going on. No, that's not watercolour pencil. You have to imagine I have a giant kind of like drawer of pencils underneath here, which I'm desperately rifling through. So I could, if I wanted to bring some of these berry shapes, I could draw in some circles to be kind of, you know, fruits in some way. So it can just roughly, and it's really just putting like a little reservoir on the paper. And then I'm also now holding far too many pens in one hand to make this easy. Let's put some down. Let's do that. Free my hand, put some pens down, and then where I've done the circles, I can then go in with the pen that I know is not going to run and give them some form just by defining those shapes like that, and again with my little sort of crisscross in the middle. And then when I've got those sort of worked out, I can then get my wet brush and add a little bit of water to them to bring that paint sort of to life and take off that watercolour edge. And it doesn't matter if it's, you know, I quite like it when it sort of bleeds out slightly and the colour kind of spreads onto the paper. But you can then just sort of go around and add that little bit of extra softness to them. The colour becomes bolder as well because it spreads into all the bumps of the paper that the pencil kind of can't reach, and it just gives it that extra kind of feel. And then as these ones are missing out, look, I think I can, because they've got green pen lines on, these ones obviously aren't ripe yet, so I can go in and soften those pen lines that I've drawn and spread them around and make them a bit more solid with the paint like that. So, and then I can put a little bit of green into them. I've got a dirty brush as well and kind of mix these colours together. Right, so there we go. So we are going to have to draw this to a conclusion, which is a shame really, because it's such a lovely piece. We could kind of keep going on it for ages and ages. But I hope that that's what that's given you, is sort of by using these colours that we associate with hedgerows and plants and growing, we can then kind of build this sort of fabulous cross-section of flowers, kind of, or sort of seed heads and things, but using the line work again to give them form with the paint first of all, and then using these lovely drips and trails to create stems and things. We can gradually build up this composition, and you can keep working on it, you can keep going back and adding more and more sort of detail and surface, and then it sort of starts to exist in its own right. And I hope you can see how that's been bringing together some of the techniques we've used. We've looked at the source material and we've now taken that slightly more imaginative leap with them, which I really hope you've enjoyed doing.